everyone. Welcome back to the Bet Free Life. I am Christina and I'm covering again for Brian. He is not here today and hopefully he'll be here next week. I know I've said that, I think, the last couple of weeks, but he's got a lot going on and he's taking tonight off, but I'm pretty sure he'll be back next week. So joining me today is Autumn, Hayden, and Jake, and they are students at Oklahoma State University. And I brought them on to talk about the documentary they've been working on, which kind of followed me, right? Kind of centered around me. I mean, sounds kind of egotistical, like you guys did it on me, but I mean, and it was really just a great process to be involved in that. And then you actually sent me your edited cut last night, and I got to watch it, and I thought it was absolutely fantastic. So I wanted to bring you guys on and just talk about first. I want to ask each of you kind of what your thoughts are and why did you choose this subject for this documentary. So I'm going to start with Jake, and then I'm going to go to Autumn and then Hayden. So let's start with Jake.
Yeah, so I think like when we were brainstorming ideas, we were trying to think of stuff that was kind of special to Oklahoma, being that we're Oklahoma State students. And one of the first things that came to mind for me, at least, was gambling. So we just did some research and found some statistics that kind of we could build off of for a storyline, dealing with mental health and just how, I guess, specific the problem is for our state compared to other states, and then from there it was just kind of like figuring out the story, which was kind of a challenge for sure. But once we found you, it was kind of easy to piece all of that together, I think.
What were your thoughts, Autumn?
So originally, yeah, like you said, when we were coming up with ideas, we were focusing on Oklahoma, and seeing the statistics about like how many casinos are actually in Oklahoma really surprised me. And I've said before, I have family members who have dealt with that sort of addiction. And so just kind of being interested in that and having a personal tie to that just kind of made the topic, the one that we went with. So.
And you, Hayden?
Yeah, kind of like Jake was kind of the one who came up with the idea. And as someone who like lives in Oklahoma, I live maybe a few miles from a casino. So I kind of thought, it'd be interesting to explore this topic because I've never really been in one or really thought about it much and just see how it really impacts Oklahoma as a whole. And I think we kind of started like with a little broad with it with all of Oklahoma, but then we found you and we were like, you know what, let's narrow this down. Let's make it a little bit more of a personal story.
Yeah, and I thought you guys asked some really great questions. I ended up coming down to the Oklahoma State studio. I don't know if there's a fancy name for it, but and meeting you guys and having you guys ask those questions, and I thought, man, these guys have really thought about the questions they want to ask, and I was so grateful for that. Did you guys have any? Like, what would you say your experience with gambling has been prior to this? Your experience, your knowledge of it prior to really delving into this topic? And you can start kind of in the same order if it's helpful, Jake.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, for me, I've never been someone that like gambled at all. I know my dad, he kind of, I think he has friends that do, and he jokes around like he'll trade stocks or whatever and be like, that's basically gambling, like legalized gambling. But, other than that, I really didn't have any preconceived notions of it other than like the promise of what it could bring to education in Oklahoma. And then I guess that was kind of tying back to your first question. Like, I think we kind of wanted to do like an expository thing at first on like, is this money actually going towards education? Is this actually benefiting the state? So that was kind of my original thought process, just based off of what I knew. And then like diving into, I guess, what we learned is that it's actually a lot more complicated than most people probably give it credit for. It's a lot more psychological And I learned a lot about, I guess, how casinos keep people, keep customers, keep a constant flow of revenue, which I had no idea about before. So,
What did that look like?
yeah, I guess it was just like talking to you, and then looking at like YouTube videos and kind of just learning about like how they design the buildings, and like they pump oxygen and just all kinds of weird sketchy stuff, honestly, that I had no idea about, and I don't think most people know about.
Yeah. There's a great book called Addiction by Design, and it's where this architectural student, she was I don't know, interning or something for somebody that built casinos, and so she wrote her book specific to how they design it, and it was a really interesting read. But even right down to the air freshener that they put into the building, so it is fascinating when you really dig into that. Autumn, I know you said you kind of had some family experience with it, but gambling wasn't something, and same with Hayden, it's not something you guys ever really did before this, right?
No, I never went to a casino like before this. Actually, like my parents kind of dragged me to a casino in the middle of filming it, and I was like, this feels wrong. But that was an experience, and I didn't really like it. Very loud and just too much going on. But my only understanding of casinos from like just before filming this was the Percy Jackson like casino scene where you have the lotus flower and it's like keeping you in there. And so that kind of relates to the structure of casinos and like how they keep you in there. So I just thought that's kind of an interesting like parallel to that.
Yeah, I never really connected that scene, but you're exactly right. Like it's like all those people are kind of zombies in there, right? And they're just like looking for that high and like staying in there. What are your thoughts, Hayden?
Well, kind of like Autumn, I had never really was interested in casinos. However, recently I've had friends who love going and they'll take me with them, and I can kind of see the appeal. It's still not really for me, but they love it. And we went to my boyfriend and his family. We went to Vegas for his mom's birthday. This whole like little group trip, and I just remember kind of feeling a little uneasy in all the casinos because they're just so big, and a lot of times I would have no clue where I was. Like we'd be walking, I'm like, am I on the second floor? Am I underground right now? Like there's no windows, there's no way to really tell like where you are in regards to everything else, and that would kind of freak me out a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And Vegas is a big place, and it seems like you can just be walking for hours, and you're just walking through all these mazes of casinos. So, did it like if these experiences happened after you started work on this, did it really impact your thoughts on it? Like really kind of changed your perspective on gambling?
I think for me it did. Like I think I was pretty neutral to the regulations, at least. I think I had the idea that yeah, it's a choice, and as long as you're an adult, I think you should be able to do what you want to do. And I think learning more about the addictive nature of it, and also not only that, but like how it affects families, is huge. So yeah, that it definitely changed my opinion, I think. I'm not sure exactly what I would want the legislation to be, because I'm not like a legal expert, and I don't know what regulations tend to work or tend to reduce harm. But I know that at least what we have in Oklahoma isn't really sustainable.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how my opinion changed. I don't know about you two.
I would say my opinion. So from the beginning, like I said, I didn't really know that much about like gambling addiction. I had some family members who experienced it. And so my dad, for example, he would tell me that he kind of had a gambling addiction before I was born. And it was just kind of went through it and then went out of it, never really got help, just like ended it cold turkey. With my uncle, I mean, he went to jail for embezzlement because his addiction was so bad that he was stealing money from his clients and everything. And I still knowing that, I still didn't really understand how big of a deal gambling addiction was. I think what Wiley said about it having the highest suicide rates, like, really just instilled in me, like, this is so serious. Like, that is just crazy to me that out of all the addictions, that gambling has the most, like, suicide rates because of that. That is just insane to me.
Yeah, and I think I really wanted you guys to come on and just really share your experience, because right now your age demographic is like, it is being hit so hard by sports betting, like, across the nation. And fortunately in Oklahoma, that's not an option. I think people still probably do it in some capacity, but um, black sites or whatever. And so I'm grateful that it's not here yet, but it will. It will eventually make it here. And so I was really just curious about, like, the impact, like, if you see your friends like doing gambling and kind of how they interact with it. But like right now, that 18 to 24-year-old demographic is just being hit so hard. I mean, when you think about it, how it can deter you, like any addiction can deter you, like keep you from going to class. It can really just deter your future, right? You get really obsessive about it. And I think not only, it can really expand into gaming as well. Video gaming and stuff like that can be a huge problem for your age group. But I really wanted to just get your guys' perspective of that. Now, when you guys jumped in my mom's in the chat as well, and so is Elizabeth, who both took part in the documentary. And what was that experience like, interviewing? Well, my mom isn't experienced in herself, but like interviewing I remember my sister called me afterwards and she's like, my dang cats, like, they messed everything up. And so, like, and I just know how hectic it is with the animals. But how was that experience, like actually talking to a family member of somebody who was impacted?
Well, first of all, the cats made the editing process a lot more bearable because we got to have a few good laughs. So, and they were also very sweet, and yeah, we didn't mind them at all. But I mean, talking to your mom and sister, I guess, really taught us a lot, because like talking to you weren't shy about talking about the harm and what struggles you were going through, and even how you affected your family. But I guess it didn't really click in until like we talked to them too, and it was like, oh yeah, this really affected like multiple people,
Yeah.
And on a high degree. Like it's not just one person's internal struggle. It affects a whole circle of people around, the person that they care for. So it was kind of eye-opening in that sense, because I don't know if I mean, you talked about how you reached out to your mom for help and stuff like that, and but I guess I don't know, like I said, like I guess it was more eye-opening to actually talk to them and get their recounting of like what those years were like. Having a sister, having a daughter that was struggling with this, and what overcoming it looked like. And also the resources. They talked about how little resources there were for them as a family member of somebody struggling with gambling addiction. It's one thing to be, the individual struggling with it, but because you have, like GA and different things, but as a family member, what can you really do? So yeah. I guess that was the most eye-opening thing about that experience for me.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead. I was just jumping to somebody.
I was just gonna say that it was interesting that you guys are twins. I didn't realize that, and so I feel like that's even like another level of being so close to someone and like seeing them go through this and trying to be there for them, but also, like she said in the documentary, like trying to set boundaries. But yeah, go ahead, Hayden.
I was actually not able to be in person, like there for these interviews, but just getting to like watch them back as we're going over them, looking for like quotes and stuff. Like Jake and Autumn really said, it was just interesting to see the effects of just knowing someone, being related to someone who has a gambling problem, and how it just kind of rolls through the family, through the friend groups and everything like that. It's just interesting.
Yeah, I think when one person is struggling, it really becomes like a family problem, right? I mean, especially when they don't know how to address it. And I remember my sister and my mom both, and they've both told me this privately, where they were scared to really address it with me because they didn't know how I was going to react, and they didn't want me to cut off contact. And like even to this day, that's still like putting a knife in my heart, right? That I hurt my family so bad, but they were too scared to come at me and talk to me about it because they were scared I was just like not going to be part of their life anymore. And they knew that would delay my help. And it took me, getting into recovery to really see the impact that my gambling had. And, I thought, and I was so convinced that I was just hurting myself. I was just hurting myself. And then it's just like when you start to kind of come out of that rationalization of like, oh, I'm not harming anybody but myself. It was like, no, I was married at the time. That caused financial harm. Like, financial harm, and the impact of that was so much greater than me, and not to mention my mom and my sister was greatly impacted by my gambling. But just to see them hurting, watching me self-destruct and them not being able to do anything about it, because as the gambler, it has to be our choice to face recovery, right? You back us in a corner and we might say, yeah, okay, I'll do some meetings, but you're not going to be as engaged in it, right? Because you're forced in it. So it has to be a choice that the person who's struggling has to make. And to watch somebody that you care about struggling and not being able to do anything about it, just thinking about that harm. And anytime that we're in an active addiction or that, it's like the ripple effect, right? When we're in addiction, the ripple effect of our behaviors and things, it just ripples out into people we didn't even think about. Because like even with my sister, you guys were talking with my sister, and I've always recognized the harm that I caused my sister, but I have the most wonderful brother-in-law, like my sister's husband. I don't know if you guys got to meet him, but he is the best dude. And I didn't realize that by harming my sister, I was harming him, right? Because he loves my sister and he loves me. But just seeing how it was hurting my sister, like hurt him. And it's like even just going outside of those things. And those are things I never even thought about. And it just took, I think my mom actually said it to me. And like it was just digging that knife in even deeper. But through recovery and through my own actions, hopefully I'm mending those bridges. And I think I have. I mean, I guess you could ask them, but I think so. I mean, they still talk to me. So, is there anything that you really wanted to, like, anything that really surprised you about this experience as you were kind of digging in and talking with people? And is there anything that really was just like, I know you talked about the design of it, like how they're designed, but was there anything else that any of you that just was like, wow, I never even thought of that?
Yeah, I think the amount of online communities and support there is definitely surprised me. I didn't think that was as big of a thing as it is, that there are so many creators like yourself that do things like this. And I think that's kind of what we tried to portray at the end of the documentary, was like, hey, look, there's this person that struggled with this one thing and then they overcame it. And now, like all these other people online, they're helping people now. They're helping people that went through the things that they went through without that kind of support. So I think that really surprised me, just to know how many just podcasts there are. Just podcasts, and that you all get together and you guys are close and collaborate with each other. I thought that was really cool to learn that you guys, don't compete with each other, but collaborate. So that was cool to learn.
Yeah.
Either of you?
I was going to say the same thing, is that I didn't realize, like, I guess there's content for everything. But when it comes to like gambling harm content, I never really thought about it that much. And so to have so many creators that they are producing like such great content and like helping people, I think that was cool to see. And then what I mentioned earlier with the suicide rates, that really surprised me. And it's just such like a big issue that I feel like needs to be talked about more when it comes to like gambling harm, because that's just the most interesting thing to me.
Yeah.
For me, I think it was just the amount of like women who need help and are like involved in these communities. Like when we were talking with you, you mentioned how you wanted to make this podcast for women, because you don't really necessarily, when you think gambling addiction, that's not the first thing you picture. It's not like there's probably a stereotypical image that pops into everybody's head, and it's not usually women. And just even as a woman, I didn't realize the amount of people who just need help with that. And so I thought that was interesting that that's kind of the aim of your podcast, to really target and help women.
Yeah, I feel like women in this space, like there are a lot of great resources, especially like Facebook has a lot of groups and things like that. But I think women in this space often are kind of marginalized or kind of not the primary focus. Like right now it's sports betting, which is impacting young men for them. And then it's just like, it is stereotypical that most people think of, like a man struggling with this, or like an older woman in her retirement years or something like that. And they don't think of like women who are 18, 19, 20 struggling with this addiction. Single mothers, empty nesters. Like I'm in my 40s, and I talk to women every day in their 40s who have been gambling since their 20s. And it's, and I think a lot of times it's women, often we just put ourselves last, our needs last. We're caregivers, we're doing all these things. And it just feels like so much to just say, I don't have time for myself. I don't have time to fix this. I've got all these other things to do. And it just feels more comfortable to stay within that cycle of chaos, because that's familiar. And so I think a lot of times it's harder for women to step outside of that and get care for themselves. And so, and to your point of like all the online stuff, that wasn't common before the pandemic. And, I have to be careful what I say, because I don't know what they glitch out. But before the pandemic, like there really wasn't that many online meetings and on that, like online resources. But due to the pandemic and all the in-person meetings couldn't meet, they had to think of something else. And so like a lot of great things started to come up and started to do that. And I think the Brian Hatch, who co-hosts this normally, he was the first one to put out a gambling specific podcast. And I think it was like eight years ago. Don't quote me on that. But, and so he was really the first one to do it. And then you've got Jamie's After Gambling podcast, and like all these really phenomenal podcasts that really helped me too. But I was still missing that women's piece, that women's voice, that woman who was working and taking care of the home and doing all these things on top of struggling with this addiction. Right. And so that's really what inspired my own personal journey, and, to get those voices out there. And so that those who are struggling know that there's help and know that they're not alone. But another piece of it too is there's no federal funding for gambling addiction recovery. There's none. So most of the funding that comes for treatment is state mandated, and it's individual to the state. So there's a lot of great states who set up, like New York, Louisiana, Minnesota. There's a lot of great states who really put in that, hey, we need to set aside this amount of funding for help. But I don't know if you noticed in your numbers, Oklahoma made, I think, $3.4 billion in gambling last year. $3.4 billion. And like $1 million of that, mixed between a couple of different groups, is set aside for gambling treatment. $1 million out of 3.4 billion. And I think that 177 million goes to the state for taxes. That's the tax revenue from that. And only $1 million gets set aside for that. And considering that 10% of the state is considered a problem, like considered to have a problem with gambling, the math just doesn't math. And it's a frustrating thing. So that's why a lot of us do things like podcasts and online groups, because there's not enough resources. There's not enough support. And So those of us in recovery who can step outside of our anonymity, which is not, I mean, it's a privilege to be able to do that. Not everybody can do that. Some people, it could impact their jobs. It could impact other areas of their life, or they're just not ready to be public. And, we don't have to share anything that we don't need to share. So there's, not as many people who step outside of that and do these kind of things. And so it's just so important in this space. So now after seeing all that, and like, what was it that stood out though in the documentary part? Like you talked to Wiley, you guys came to the Oklahoma conference on problem gambling. You got to kind of learn a little bit there. Was there just anything that stood out? Hopefully I'm not repeating the same questions, but it's hard when I'm having a conversation, but just anything. Oh, and what is the name of the documentary? Because there's a couple people asking here.
Oh, it's To Call Your Own Bluff. That's kind of what we came up with. Just because, like you mentioned earlier, to really go through the recovery process, everyone we talked to kind of said the same thing, which is that you have to want it. You have to want your own recovery. It's up to the individual. And that kind of felt symbolic of like your story, because talking about your story, talked about how you knew a little bit about how it's you wanted to quit, and you wanted to for a while, but you just couldn't, and that's common, like with everyone we talked to. Like it's very normal to have that process. But I think like at the conference, what stood out to me was that was how many like different groups of people are affected by it, and also how trauma really relates to like the root cause of addiction, not just gambling addiction even, but like all kinds of addiction. Like but especially gambling addiction, because it's not like getting addicted to heroin or something. You take it one time and then your body is wants more of it or craves it. It's like gambling addiction, it's called the silent addiction, I think, right? And I kind of think that's why, is because most people that develop a problem with it have some kind of underlying personal issue, that it's not that they have a financial problem or they have a problem with managing money. It's usually something much more serious than that. So I don't think I realized that before, because I think my idea of gambling addiction was like, well, if you're rich, is gambling addiction even really a thing? Because you can afford to, right? But like you talk about with young men struggling with sports betting now, there's so many athletes that are in debt, like to bookies in Vegas. And I think like, I don't want to spread false information, but I think it was like Shohei Ohtani, like the best baseball player in the world right now. He's like in debt for gambling. So I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. I didn't know any of that before.
Yeah, and you see like Bruno Mars, like $50 million into debt, and then Michael Jordan struggled with gambling. The golfer, I can't remember his name. I'm not somebody that follows golf, but
Tiger Woods.
Yeah, I think he struggled. But who's the other one? The older gentleman that was like pro golfer. I can't think of his name. I'm sure maybe some
Arnold Palmer.
No, I can't think of his name. Maybe somebody will throw it in the chats. But he's real well known, and it was just come out, I think, last year about gambling, and even Bill Mickelson. Thank you so much.
Oh, Phil.
Yeah, talking about it. And so it's just interesting how it, like for me, addiction, you're right. Addiction is a symptom. It's a symptom of internal issues. And, sometimes people can't really put a finger on it. They're like, oh, I had a good childhood and like everything's really great in my life. But yet you're continuing to self-harm, which, anytime you fall into an addiction or it takes control, that's a way of self-harm, self-sabotage. And so it's like, there's got to be something. And that's why it's so important to work with like a therapist or, somebody that can kind of help you pinpoint it. But another interesting piece to it as well is like, yeah, I mean, there's no, like, addiction doesn't care what degree you have. It doesn't care how much money you have. It doesn't care, how big your house is or what kind of car you drive. It doesn't care the color of your skin or who you love. It just cares that there's something and it's latching onto it. And, that's the biggest thing. And I tell people all the time, like, don't compare your journey to each other, because I'll also have a group, and I'll have somebody who's not financially, like, they can financially gamble. Like, it hasn't caused them financial harm, but yet they're in the same meetings as somebody who's got $1 to their name because they've gambled everything and they have to make that dollar somehow stretch 2 weeks. And it's just interesting. Like, we can't compare our journeys, but even though they have the money to gamble, it's still causing harm at some aspect of their life, right? Or they wouldn't be questioning it. It could be causing relationship harm, because even though maybe it's not causing them financial harm, but they're never home. They're never present. Or when they are home, they're stuck on their phone and they're not actively engaging with their families. And so it's just, we can never compare our journeys, but there's always going to be something that's leading to this behavior. And it's like pinpointing that behavior. It's building healthier habits and ways to move forward in a healthier way. So as we kind of close this down, is there anything that you want to share with somebody that might be watching, that which I don't know if we're going to release this or if people are going to be able to see it? What your guys' intention? What are your intentions with the documentary? I guess we can ask that.
Well, I think just to share one personal story, which is yours, and to show people, like, to spread awareness first of all, but also to make it show people that there is hope, and that there is a journey of recovery that can lead to redemption. Even if you think you're at this low point that you can't recover from, you can. And I think our goal is to inspire and to spread awareness. But yeah, to inspire people that they can overcome whatever they're going through. And one of the great quotes that I think your mom said was that, it might have been your sister, one of the two. They said, like, no matter what you're going through, there's somebody out there that's going through the same thing. So I think that's kind of what our intention is just to show that to people that might be struggling with this, there's other people out there. And if you don't know, there are a lot of communities where you can, get free resources or free help, like how both you and Rob talked about, that you don't charge anybody for, anything, any of the content you create. You just put it out there. So I think that was kind of what our intentions turned into as we kept working on it. Autumn, Hayden, have anything to add?
I was just going to say kind of the same thing, like, definitely for awareness. And like I was saying, like, at the beginning, I just thought of gambling addiction like another addiction, but it's obviously, like, people go through it, especially in Oklahoma, since there's so many casinos. So many people are going through this, and it's such, like, a major issue. And I don't feel like a lot of people really think about it. I know we didn't really think that much into it until we made this documentary. So I really hope that by watching this, people can realize what a big issue this is, and maybe some change later down the line is in order, hopefully.
Yeah. Excuse me, sorry. Yeah. Like I said, I'm from Oklahoma, so I grew up with, like, casinos all around, and I never really thought about the people within them. I was just like, oh, it's a casino. So I think with this documentary, we're really wanting to show the people who have been in casinos and who have faced this addiction and how they overcame it. I mean, we kind of showed your story at the beginning, but we wanted the end, kind of that last thing people remember, to be that you did overcome it, that you started this podcast, that you're continuing to do that. And that's why we had that, like, hopefulness at the end, because we knew, like, the end is what they're going to remember. They're going to walk away knowing there's hope and that there is a possibility for just a future without gambling addiction, like, for them to overcome it.
Absolutely. And I think kind of back to the question on like how, advocacy or legislation, I think one of the things myself and Hatch, who co-hosts this, is we both say we feel like they should close at 2 a.m. You know what I mean? We feel like they should all close at 2 a.m. just like the bars do. Give people a timeout, let them go home, get those ones that are just like can't seem to leave out. I think that because in our state, a lot of them are 24/7. There are some that are just certain hours, but most of them are 24 hours. So I think that would be a great place to start. And then, we hopefully, if anybody's into advocacy, we have the GRIT Act, which is the Gambling Recovery Investment Treatment Act, that is being sponsored, and hopefully we'll see some impact of that in the next year or two. So that's definitely something to Google for anybody watching, learn more about that and ways to help advocate and push that forward, because that would create federal funding and kind of hopefully line out some federal funding overall for gambling addiction treatment. And that's one of the things that people struggle with when they finally do accept this. And that's why I love the name of it so much, like Calling Your Own Bluff, because that's true. You have to accept it. You have to kind of break through the delusion that you're telling yourself, like, oh, somehow I'm going to win enough and it's just going to make everything okay and I'll be able to walk away. But I'm here to tell you that does not happen. Like, I will never, I could put whatever number I wanted on it and be like, if I won this much money, I'd be able to walk away from it. Everything will be wiped clean because I'd be able to take care of everything from the harm I did. But I'm here to tell you, I hit that number. And I continued to keep digging. And it's just like, so kind of cutting through that delusion of like, somehow this is going to change my life. Well, it did. It changed my life, but it wasn't for the better. And so I just love how you took that. Like, I don't remember saying, like, I didn't lead you guys to that. Like, you guys came up with that. And I loved it when I saw it. And so, okay, you guys are submitting it because it's a class project. And then is there a way that people can watch it if they want to watch it?
Yeah,
It's on YouTube.
it's on my YouTube. So I guess I can, or the link I sent you should work. Okay. If you want to share that, however you want to share it, that should be fine. If you want us to make those edits you were talking about first, we can take care of that, and then you can go about sharing it. But yeah, people should be able to watch it however, whenever. I think our professor is gonna submit it to some contests, maybe some festivals. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I'll just wait until you guys see if you guys are able to do that, and then send me that link, and then I'll post it on this channel. If I can, if that works, I'll post it on this channel, yeah. And that way anybody watching can come back and watch it and see what they think. But anyway, I appreciate you guys so much. And one last question for you all. What do you think going into life now, after doing this, after talking to people, after exploring this, like, would you feel open to have conversations with people that you come across that are struggling? Would you feel safe to be like, look, I did this thing, and, kind of gave me this perspective?
I mean, yes and no. I think because like I think I'd be more open to listening, because I haven't dealt with it myself. But I think, just having conversations, absolutely, like I'd be comfortable with it, with talking about it, because, we've already talked to, multiple people that this like common issue has affected them, deeply. So there's no discomfort with it, I don't think, at least for me.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Like, I'm open to talking about it, and also maybe leading them in the right direction to some channels that we touched on, and be like, here's a resource. Because like you said, your experience with like the hotline and everything wasn't as good. So maybe lead them to somewhere where they feel like they can actually relate and get some help, depending on the person. So, yeah.
I definitely think I'd probably be able to talk to people about it, have like conversations, and just maybe point them in the right direction. I've had friends, people I'm close to, kind of refer themselves as casual gamblers, and I think I've said something to before, like, okay, as long as it's just casual, if and I've kept an eye on it, like if things change, like, hey, you good? Like I have talked to some people before about it, but yeah, I think I'd be able to talk to people about it.
I think just from my own experience, like I can honestly say before I really understood my addiction, like I always feel like I was an empathetic and kind person in general, just my whole life. But when I was like, I would still see maybe somebody on the street who you knew was, impacted by drugs or something, and I'd be like, oh, why are they doing that? And maybe there'd be a little bit of judgment or something, and I'm being honest about my own thoughts on that. And then after like really recognizing my own experience, it's just like that's somebody's daughter, that's somebody's mother. Like it just really brought this whole level of empathy to me. Like I always thought I was empathetic, but it takes going through something yourself to really get to that level of empathy, or even just experiencing it through somebody else's eyes or somebody else's experience. And it just changes the way that you move forward, when you're dealing with people who are struggling in any capacity. It changes the way that you broach them. And I know for me it's like um I'm not like judgmental in their situation. Like if they tell me, I get people that reach out to me that struggle in all levels of compulsion. Like not necessarily gambling. Gambling can be like a co-occurring thing, but it could be alcohol, it could be spending, it could be any form of it. And then I learned that there's certain forms of gambling that I knew nothing about. Like I'm still learning about this. Like if you ask me any kind of sports betting stuff, like I really didn't know anything before. And now I can really, all these different side bets and, all this terminology for betting. And it's like, I've really immersed myself in this situation. But I remember when I told somebody about my gambling, they were like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Like, because they had no understanding of it. And I'm wondering how many times when somebody told me about something they were struggling with that I was just like, come on, and it just changes that. But even now when people reach out to me, like somebody that's struggling with maybe something that's going on TikTok, like live sales on TikTok, or like they get into something and it doesn't matter what it is. If they're hurting and they're causing harm because of this compulsion or addiction or disorder, however anybody identifies, it's important to address it. It's important to show them compassion and empathy and try and navigate them to the best resources to help them overcome. And just the fact that you guys were doing this documentary in our state, and just it's not something that's talked about. I know that I did a local news piece here on News 9 a couple months back, right around Super Bowl. So, man, time flies. That was a while ago. And like I asked them not to like show the most vulnerable part of me, because I think you guys saw this when I was telling my story. It takes me to that moment. It takes me to that place. And even though I'm over 3 years in recovery now, it still was so impactful in my life that it's very vulnerable to share my story. And when I asked them not to like focus on the part where I really teared up, that's the part they like zoomed in on, during their 1 minute segment. And it was like, it's so frustrating, but yeah, I'm glad that they talked about it. But overall, it's usually advertisement for casinos. It's usually for gambling stuff. There's very little like gambling awareness or gambling prevention campaign. And especially around the news stations, because they're all sponsored by some casino, all of them.
I mean, it's funny you mentioned that. I think our school, our media school is sponsored by I don't remember exactly what tribe, but one of our sponsors is a casino as well. So even at the school level, just a small media operation that we have has that as well. But I do appreciate your vulnerability and telling your full story and being honest and open and just cooperative and helping us out, like above and beyond coming up to Stillwater and everything was super helpful. and we couldn't have done nearly as good of a job, I think, without your help. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And okay, so we're going to go ahead and close it out. But I do want to mention that we were talking right before we went live, and we were talking last night. We had storms, and I feel for everybody in Sulphur, Oklahoma. Tornado wiped out that town, and I think there were 2 deaths last night from the tornadoes. I think they said at one point there might have been 10 or 12 tornadoes that touched ground last night, and I know was it Nebraska that just had Lincoln, Nebraska that just had a tornado that took out a town. But we were just talking when we were all watching the news, because I think it impacted our whole state at some, with all these. And we were like, it was interesting when the weather people were on there, and they were like, well, it's close to Riverwind Casino, and it was like close to the Choctaw Casino, and and every time they were saying where the tornadoes or the high winds or the rotation was, it was always like somewhere near a casino. And it's just interesting now that on the news, like that's how they gauge where everything is in Oklahoma. It's like, you got to turn left by the casino, or, and I just wanted to throw that out there. It was just kind of, because we all kind of recognized that when we were trying to watch for everybody. But I'm glad you guys were safe there in Stillwater. So again, thank you guys so much for hopping on with me tonight. Sorry Brian wasn't here. He probably would have, really, really loved this conversation. So I want to thank everybody who's watching tonight. I want to thank everybody who took part in the documentary. And again, can you say the name one more time? And I'll put it on the Bet Free Life as soon as it probably within the next week.
Yeah, it's To Call Your Own Bluff.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everybody. And thanks everybody for watching.